Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Exotic Car Facts Pundits Podcast. I'm your host, The Real Deal Neal. And I just want to say once again, thank you for all of the questions, comments, feedback, and support that I've been getting on the book and also on Exotic Car Facts, the YouTube channel, and also the audio podcast. I appreciate all the feedback, and I'm glad that you guys are staying engaged and sending in those questions. And I've been having some really great conversations about the book and also about some of the topics that I cover in the Exotic Car Facts book. And one of the questions that I've gotten asked a couple of times was, how do you become a dealer, or is it worth it to become a car dealer? And my answer to that question would be yes, and also no. I mean, it just depends on what your reason for wanting to become a dealer is. And I'll clarify that. So a lot of people have this misconception that, being a car dealer gives you certain perks. And there are certain benefits to being a car dealer that I'll go into in just a little bit. But I think that the overwhelming um, perspective that people have is that car dealers get to drive around in exotic cars all day. They don't pay tax on cars, and they get to ride around on dealer plates, and they don't have to pay retail price for the vehicles that they have in inventory, and they get to kind of use them as their own play toys until they get ready to sell them, and then they sell them for some ridiculous profit, and then they wash, rinse, and repeat that cycle over and over again. Now, as glamorous as that may sound, the truth of the matter is that it's really not like that for 99.9% of the dealers or car dealerships that I know of, that I do business with. And the reason that is because there's quite a bit of overhead and quite a bit of reoccurring expenses that happen when you own a dealership. There's things that you have to do on a daily basis to keep the dealership operational so that you're able to maintain your license, and just a myriad of other things that over time, I mean, again, if your goal is to save money on buying an exotic car, there are much better ways to do it. And if you're not planning on frequently um, selling cars, I mean, retailing cars on a daily basis, then it's probably best not to go out and get your dealer's license and hold it just for that purpose, because the operating costs that you're going to incur will typically be way, way more expensive than just buying an occasional car, driving it for a while, maybe holding on to it, and then trying to resell it and flip it for a profit. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background about how I went about getting my dealer's license, here in the state of Florida, where I'm at, typically it does require you to complete a pre-licensing course. I believe it's about 16 hours or so that you'd have to complete prior to getting your dealer's license or applying for your dealer's license here in Florida. And typically you can take a course online. It's usually, if you Google car dealer pre-license course or something to that effect for your state, you should be able to find the requirements on your local DMV and maybe the tax collector's page. Um, and you can see what's required in your specific state or geography to get your dealer's license. And they have all different levels of dealer's license. I mean, you have salvage dealer's licenses and used car dealer license, new car dealer licenses. So there's a couple of different levels to it. And typically, if you get into the most common one, which would be a used car or used vehicle dealer's license or reseller's license, the requirements to get that, along with getting the pre-licensing course out of the way, is that you also, here in Florida, have to maintain a retail space that you can display the vehicle. And so unless you own a property already that's appropriate and that can be zoned properly to sell and retail vehicles to the public, you actually have to go out and lease or rent a space in order to get your license, and it has to be inspected and approved before they'll give you your dealer's license and your certification. So that's something to consider. That's a fixed cost that, whether you sell one car a month, 100 cars a month, or no cars at all, if you're having to pay rent somewhere, then that's going to be a cost that, you'll have to incur and maintain in order to keep that dealer's license. You also have to be bonded and insured, which again are additional costs of having that dealer's license. And in order to maintain your dealer plates, I mean, there's restrictions on how you can use them and, you know, where you can use them and things like that. So you don't just get to ride around for free. I mean, every aspect of opening up a dealership, even if it's a small one, even if you only intend to sell a few cars a year, um, it does incur some holding costs. I mean, there are some recurring costs of having that dealer's license. And so I just want to make sure that you're aware of that ahead of time, because I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and we were discussing floor planning and, getting the business credit so that you can get a line of credit in order to carry inventory. And again, if you get your dealer's license, you get everything set up. There's definitely tons of ways that you can build that business credit for the dealership and get that floor plan so that you can actually carry some inventory and float it for a while. But again, you have to really and truly be actively engaged in the business of trying to sell cars on a daily basis. And, everything from acquiring inventory to reconditioning inventory to being able to display it properly and market and advertise it. It all carries a cost. And I mean, that's just the cost of doing business. And, as I say in the book, again, one of the best things you can do is start a business. So again, if your goal is to start a car dealership or an exotic car dealership with the goal of actively trying to sell exotic cars, then no, it's not a bad thing. And a lot of those business expenses, they are written off as operating expenses and things like that. So there's pros and cons to it. Like I said, it does require work. It does require quite a bit of effort. But if you're up to it and if it's something that you're really passionate about and something that you really want to do, then I say definitely go for it and you know give it your best shot, and hopefully you'll do really well. One other thing I do want to mention about having a dealership is that um, aside from carrying inventory, which I'll get into that in just a second, how to acquire your inventory. It really is about building relationships with your customers and with the public at large. Because when you think about it, um, exotic cars um, are really a very, very small niche market. The exotic car community in most cities is going to be a relatively small community. Even in major cities like Los Angeles or Las Vegas or even Miami, you'll see that people who are driving around in exotic cars or who are exotic car owners, they typically know of other exotic car owners, or they network with them, or they're at least mildly aware of them from going to car meets and maybe social media. So, as a exotic car dealer, you really want to be mindful of the fact that your reputation, more than anything else, is going to be the thing that makes or breaks your business. And being able to run a good, clean business, being able to sell clean cars that are in good condition, being able to help customers get into and out of cars, easily without any kind of extracurricular fuss or frustration on their part. Being able to help people with complex finance issues, ways of structuring the deal so that the customer actually feels good about it and they don't get buyer's remorse or feel that you know a few months down the line that they've overpaid for a car that they you know got in over their head, or that they're just in the wrong car and you just kind of sold them on something that wasn't really a good buy. A lot of that is a part of the dealership success, or part of being a successful exotic car dealer. And again, typically you're going to be dealing with other dealers all over the country, as well as, brokers and some private sellers. And you want to make sure that you have a great reputation, that, when you do speak to people, or when people are speaking about you, that, they're speaking highly of you, and that, you're held in high regard. And at the very least, you want people to not say anything negative about the experience that they've had with you. Because, I mean, that more than anything else will kill a deal. You'd be surprised at how much information you can find about some of the biggest dealers in the country. And when you look at some of the negative feedback or some of the negative comments that they've gotten and how they respond to those comments, a lot of that gets circulated, whether it's true or not, or if the situation was even accurate. You know, perception is typically reality when it comes to exotic cars. And so if you get a bad review, or you get a bad customer experience, or even if somebody decides that they want to kind of take your legs out from under you and you know smear your reputation, that can result in hurting your business way more than even with a regular car dealership, because of the type of clients that you're dealing with, and also because of um, the size of the purchase. I mean, again, for some people, spending $100,000, $200,000 on a car is just a drop in the bucket, and it really is a non-issue. And so they may not be as sensitive to a negative review or poor customer experience. But if you've got a person who buys an exotic car every 5 years or every 10 years, or they've been saving up forever to buy this one exotic car, it's their dream car, chances are they're going to do their homework. They're going to try to do as much due diligence and background before they make the deal, because to them, if they spend their money and they get a bad deal, then yeah, it's gonna sting a lot more than it would for a person who is buying exotic cars all the time. And you know if they get burned on a deal here, they'll probably make it up on the next one pretty easily, or they have the ability to move in and out of the cars with minimal losses. And so, just something to consider. When you're going into becoming a dealer, if you're considering being a dealer, or even if you're considering flipping exotic cars, for fun and profit. Again, your reputation is everything in this business, and one or two negative reviews, or if you have a negative interaction with somebody, it could really kill your reputation and your ability to sell cars at a profit. And in a lot of times, you may end up having to take a loss on a car just to move it, because somebody's upset with you, or they feel like you're trying to gouge them on the price, or they're just not getting a fair shake. So, with that being said, the thing I wanted to mention about the wholesale costs and dealer costs is that when you look at how dealers acquire exotic cars, you'll realize that a lot of the cars that you'll see um, that a dealer has listed for sale is actually not a car that they own. And to clarify that, a lot of exotic car dealerships, especially the smaller ones, typically tend to be a boutique style dealership. So it'll be, you know, a smaller dealership that may actually own or floor plan, a few cars, maybe 5 or 6 cars. But the bulk of their inventory may actually be cars that they've taken in on consignment, which is another way that exotic car dealerships are able to sell cars and carry inventory, or have inventory, without actually carrying the additional burden of trying to floor plan, millions of dollars worth of cars. You think about it, if you had a small dealership and, say that dealership had 10 Lamborghini Aventadors at an average holding cost of about $350,000 to $400,000. you know, the math would add up pretty quickly on that to where, you're a couple million in with just a few cars. And depending on how quickly you're turning these cars, because as we all know, exotic cars really don't move that quickly in certain markets. Um, you know, if you look at Cars Gurus, for example, and you look at the number of days that a car has been sitting at a dealership or it's been listed online, typically you'll see a lot of these exotic cars average about 300 or so days or more that they've been sitting online or they've been listed for sale and they haven't moved. You'll see a lot of um, interest in the cars. You'll see a lot of people following the cars and um, watching that car, because one of the things that a lot of people know is when a car is floor planned, typically the dealer wants to turn that car within 90 days maximum before it starts to eat up your profit margin. And so when you see a car that's been sitting at a dealership for an extended period of time and it hasn't moved, chances are that car is actually there on consignment. It doesn't belong to the dealer. It actually belongs to a customer, and they've just got that car listed on their site or listed online for them. And the dealer is essentially brokering the deal for the customer. Or they may have taken the car in as a trade contingent on the car selling, and then once it sells, the dealer is able to go ahead and process that trade and help the customer get into something else. So keep that in mind. I mean, again, unless it's a large franchise dealership that typically runs volume and they turn their cars pretty quickly, you'll see like Audi dealerships or, Maserati or Lamborghini, Mercedes-Benz, some of your more luxury highline dealerships, Porsche, when they do get these off-brand or other brand cars in and they're carrying them in their inventory, just kind of keep in mind that chances are that car may be there on consignment sometimes. With a lot of the larger dealerships, they typically will just buy it outright or they'll take it in as a trade and they'll do the transaction. So it would actually be a car that's floor planned. But again, you just want to keep that in mind that with the larger franchise dealerships and the big network dealerships, you'll typically see that cars will fly out of those dealerships, you know, on that 30, 60, 90-day schedule, because they are floor plan and financed. And, so that strategy works really well with them. With smaller dealerships, with the more less known or the more abstract kind of exotic car boutique dealerships, you'll see again that the inventory will typically sit for a long, long time. And that's one thing you can look for. If you see a car has been at a particular dealership or listed for sale for, in excess of 90 days and the price hasn't really dropped, chances are it's a car that's been taken in on consignment and the dealership isn't really pressed to move it because they're trying to hold out for the best price for the customer who actually owns the car, or the customer's got a target price that they won't drop below, or they haven't decided that they want to drop below because they're holding out for the maximum amount for the car, or maybe it's financed and they've got to pay off on it and the customer doesn't want to be upside down or responsible for paying anything other than getting out of the car clean. So the car will kind of sit there at that price until somebody decides to pay it or some other external forces affect it and the car moves off the dealer's listing. So um, other than that, um, when it comes to wholesaling cars and the auctions, I talk about that in the book about how you can look at Manheim Market Reports, MMR. That's one of the most popular ones out there, just because they've got a really convenient app that lets you look up car values. And Manheim is a fairly well-known and well-established auction outlet, so they do collect a lot of data on a lot of vehicles, including exotic cars. And so their wholesale average price for transactions that have occurred within the past quarter to half of a year will typically reflect recent movements in the market and what actual dealers are paying for these cars through the Manheim auction system. Now, it doesn't necessarily reflect the entire market because, again, Manheim just collects and uses its own data from cars that have actually gone through their auction system. But you know, within a few $1,000s, you can kind of assume that the market is responding pretty similar to what their averages are. And I like to use Manheim because, again, it is a convenient way to check and gauge what the market is doing at any given time on a particular make and model of exotic car. That being said, when you look at Manheim prices and you compare that to retail, typically, most dealers are going to try to tack on $10,000 to $20,000 on top of what they've gotten the vehicle at quote unquote wholesale price for. Um, that seems to be the average margin that most dealers are trying to make on an exotic car. Um, I think it's, you know, ridiculous, but if you're not doing a lot of volume, or if you've had to put a lot of money into reconditioning the car, or if you're anticipating a longer hold time and thinking that you're going to have to sit on the car for a while, typically dealers are going to mark the car up significantly so they can maximize their profit. Also, dealers do anticipate that you will have a customer who may be somewhat well educated and savvy, and they'll come in and want to haggle on the price, and so it gives you enough of a buffer that if somebody comes in and they try to cut you a little bit to get the price down, that you'll still be well above what you're into the car for, and so that you can still have enough of a buffer to make a decent profit for you having acquired and reconditioned and retailed that vehicle. Um, Aside from that, though, what I always recommend is check eBay listings, the completed listings on eBay, and also look at what the vehicles are priced at on Auto Trader and Cars Gurus and other online listing sites like Cars.com, and just kind of see what the prices are being listed at. And you can see that typically, even with dealers, I've seen it on OVE, which is the dealer version of basically the dealer version of eBay. It's a dealer only online auction site. You'll see vehicles listed on OVE for the exact same price that the dealer has it listed at retail um, on eBay or on cars.com or another listing site. And the reason being is, even with dealers or among other dealers, they realize that you have your average retail consumer who may have access to OVE. A lot of people have friends who, are dealers, and they let them go shopping on OVE to pick out a car, or you'll have brokers who have access to OVE to try to um, source cars for a potential client who's looking for a specific make or model of exotic car. And so instead of, setting the pricing consistent with what the wholesale value would be on MMR, typically you'll see a lot of dealers will overprice the car on OVE as well, or they'll use retail pricing on OVE just as a way to still try to maximize their profits. And, you know, the best way to get quality inventory typically is going to be to look at a private seller who wants to sell the car. You can have a constructive conversation with them to try to negotiate the best price on the car for both of you, both the buyer and the seller. Um, the other thing is, with dealerships, a lot of times when a customer comes in, especially at some of the larger network dealerships, the dealer will typically cut them pretty low on their trade value. So, you go to trade in a desirable car, like a first generation Gallardo or older Ferrari 360s and 430s, um, cars that, you may be finished with. And so you don't really care about trying to extract maximum value. You just want to get out of the car and get into something else. And so, if you're trading up from something that you're currently driving, a lot of times the dealer will lowball you on your trade just so they can maximize their profit. They'll probably end up taking some off the top end of whatever car they're trying to retail. But, they'll take that out of what they're offering you on the trade so that it balances out and they're able to maintain their profit margin. So, with that being said, again, if you are interested in buying exotic cars and flipping them for fun and profit, and being able to drive them, unless you're planning on um, actively working at it every single day, and being in the marketplace every single day, and um, buying and selling exotic cars, at a pretty frequent level. I mean, unless you're constantly, flipping cars, um, then yeah, I would say that the dealer's license may be um, more of just a formality, or something that you know you could still make a decent margin if you are savvy, and if you know how to look for the right car, and if you have the ability to buy and hold the right car at the right price. And again, this isn't to discourage you from getting your dealer's license. I would definitely encourage anybody, if you have the ability uh, to get your dealer's license, to go ahead and do it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the more legitimate business you run, the more you'd be able to write off some of the um, business activity costs that you're going to incur anyway, whether you're a dealer, a broker, or just a guy who's looking to flip cars on the side. There's certain, you know, costs such as advertising and your time and effort in sourcing vehicles, and some of those other things that, as long as you're going to be doing those types of things anyway, why not get the benefit of being able to deduct your business expenses and write that stuff off? So, one other thing is, in certain states, in order to become a car broker, you do have to go through the same certification, or very similar certification, to becoming a car dealer. So it's kind of, six one way, half dozen another. If you're going to go through all the effort of, having to do all the licensing and holding requirements for getting your dealer's license, you might as well go ahead and do that anyway, and go all in, and become a dealer, as opposed to just being a broker. Although with being a broker, again, because you're really just a middleman, and you're facilitating the transaction between your potential clients and other dealerships, you don't have to necessarily carry as much overhead, and you may not have high operating costs. So you can actually charge a lot less for the service that you're providing, and helping your clients get into and out of cars, and brokering deals between dealerships and customers. But more so, as a car broker, you really are looking at the relationship aspect of it, and making sure that you've got a good reputation, and that you're actually able to not just deliver the car, but also deliver the vehicle or the transaction at a value that people don't mind paying a couple of bucks for. Because most people now, thanks to the power of the internet, they have the ability to work out a fairly good deal. There may be, within a few $1,000s, you know, margin on either side that they might have been able to pick up. But you have to think about it again. If you're saving a customer, $1,000 here or there, is it worth it for them to then turn around and pay you, $500 or $1,000, out of that savings? And so you just have to really look at it from that perspective, and find the right customer, somebody who values, the ease of transaction, and their time more than um, what it would cost for you to actually kind of negotiate the deal for them. And even with that, again, you want to make sure that you're providing a value to the customer, that they see a definitely tangible upside, or benefit to that transaction, and having you there to broker the deal. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. Like I said, I've gotten a couple of questions about this, and I've had some really great conversations recently with some of you guys about being a dealer and a broker, working on deals, and um, helping people get into and out of cars, and flipping cars. And so just wanted to make a quick podcast and video to talk about that. So feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I definitely look forward to talking to you guys soon. Take care.